What is up, YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program 2. This is, or should at least be, episode 2. And I'm just trying out a very ugly setup here, very similar to the asparagus design, but obviously we don't have the fuel pipes because they are unlocked much later on in the research. This is my first attempt, or at least the first building attempts to get to a MUN orbit, and if it works, or when we get it to work, then just a bit of extra delta V should get us down onto the surface as well. So that worked nicely, or at least it's okay. Full orbit at 80 by 80, quite accurate there, of course, using K2D2. 3,105 delta V left. That should be more than enough to get to the moon. It's certainly not a get to the moon, land, lift off, and come back, but it's enough to get to the moon, right? So with the circularized orbit on Kerbin, we can now just throw out a maneuver node, push that out to the moon, and see if we can get an intersect. That should do it. I just need to push it a bit over. I want to go around the MUN in the right direction. And by the right direction, I mean, well, I suppose it depends on which way you look at that. Directions are a bit irrelative in space. But still got 3k left, and we just need to wait now and burn this, which is 862 delta V, and then at the apogee of the MUN we will then retrograde that down into an orbit. It doesn't have to be a symmetrical orbit, nothing special, but that should get us into an orbit nevertheless. And there should be science there. There should be science getting to the MUN, and science getting a circularization of the MUN. Also, I believe there is a quest for mission control just for the circularization, as long as it is within the parameters, which are reasonably quite large, to be honest. So the countdown, 3, 2, 1, 0, and engage there. And we just have to now burn down this to get us an orbit, or an intersect, sorry. Like so. Nicely done. And that's it. So that maneuver node now, this is just words, can be removed. Or we just need to now wait until we get to that periapsis. Upon getting there, that is your full retrograde to burn backwards, as it would be called, retrograde. Or backwards to your relative velocity is what retrograde is. And then, of course, that will capture us in an orbit. If we've got enough delta V, which 2200 is more than enough to get a capture around the MUN at this speed. So the maneuver node is set up to get a circularization around the moon at the periapsis that we did set, so changing views now to allow us to burn to that. So bottom left hand corner you can see the stats themselves. Periapsis is 215-ish. We've already got an orbit around the moon which activated that quest, as I said. Bringing that down now to 250. So 250 by 200,000 meters as an orbit on the MUN. And we are good to go. Landing from here is relatively simple. All you need to do is retro burn down. If you want to land on the equator anyway, you just retro burn down and then pick your landing spot. If you want to go somewhere else on the planet, higher or lower, southern or northern hemisphere or the poles, you would of course have to adjust your orbit accordingly. It's always easiest to land directly from an orbit. You can land directly without going into an orbit, but this just makes it easier and safer because you're slower than coming in hot and then trying to outburn that damage from any sort of friction or heat that you get. Of course, you're okay on the MUN and Mimas because there are no atmospheres, but other places you would have to be fighting the atmosphere. So after collecting some science both from inside and then there is also outside the EVA of the spaceship in the orbit, I did reduce the orbit ever so slightly to get a low orbit, which is why you can see the periapsis is now 103,000 instead of the 200,000 it was. And transmitting the data. Now I'm only doing this for the sake of it really, I don't have to or need to. I'm returning the rocket anyway is the plan. So you don't need to do that. Samples, of course, your service samples, you will have to return them, but we're not doing that. We're not going on the surface. All I need to do now is I am captured within the moon's orbit, so I just need to burn slightly out of that orbit, which will allow us then to get captured by Kerbin again, because we'll be in its service of influence, circle of influence, sorry. And then we can do a few maneuver nodes to get that to take us as close as possible to a landing. Now again, it's safer to make an orbit of Kerbin and then descend from there, but you can go in hot. Now with the way the settings are on this playthrough, there was no way my rocket would survive that. I don't have any heat shields at all, apart from the ones that are built into the capsule, so I know from experience already that I would come in too fast, too hot, and I'll just explode. So what I need to do is get out of here, get into an orbit, as you can see there. Any orbit will do. And then at the highest point of that orbit, you can burn retrograde to bring the other side in. It's always most efficient to burn the furthest away from the body, of course. So we'll go for the furthest distance away from Kerbin and burn retrograde to bring the opposite side in much cheaper. Getting that in down to about, I like to do about 30,000-40,000 meters. You can bring it to 0, of course, but then you find yourself coming in a bit too hot. So the countdown now is to burn, and that will take us outside of the Mun's sphere of influence and into Kerbin's sphere of influence, where we will then be able to recapture ourselves on a nice orbit and then descend from there. And then jumping forward, you can see that that is indeed slowing us down, using the remainder of the fuel to slow us down even further. Landing with a lot of fuel isn't the best solution or idea, for the obvious factor that you weigh more. So burning off the fuel will slow you down, but also increase your efficiency of your parachutes and basically everything else. Your ability to slow down in the atmosphere, which is what you mostly rely on when doing these sort of shots into an atmosphere, that will be a lot more effective the less you weigh, of course. So burning off as much fuel, if not all the fuel that you can, is always the best way to do that. However, if you're going to blow off the capsule anyway and just land with your command pod, it doesn't really matter because there is no fuel in that. Although it has monopropellant vents, there is no monopropellant storage in that I'm aware of. The reason I didn't stay in orbit much longer as well is the fact that there is the mod to give them food, water and oxygen within the capsule. You can see that in the top has gone down nearly a fifth, and that was just there and back. So the last thing I need is to have Kerbal starving to death for no purpose whatsoever. Again, this is all practice for when they release colonies, because that's what I'm most interested in. I will travel to every planet. There was some comments made, so for the series of which we do that, every planet will be visited, because that is resources that we need to collect. Though the end goal for me really at the minute, unless there are any other options or ideas, because we're still only playing with one solar system in KSP 2, is to colonize 𝐒𝐿, which is one of the moons of Jewel, and is almost identical to Kerbin, other than it's got a lot more water. I would like to try and colonize the further outest planet of the game as well, just to give us a stepping stone for where we can then launch to deep space once they unlock that ability. But now let's just push through to a safe landing and see what we get from that expedition. And then straight back on the horse's back, as the saying goes, because we know that that setup, or at least I know that that setup works. It's not the prettiest, it certainly won't be the most efficient, but it works. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of extra fuel on that, a bit more support in terms of life support. I also need some landing gears that I need to make sure that they actually fit, because there's small versus medium that we'll get to in a bit. And then, of course, for a return, I want to make sure that there is parachutes as well. The idea here is that we will get a land on the Mun, and that we will be able to take back off again. But landing on the Mun will give us a huge amount of points that we desperately need to move forward into the second tier of research. So here we are back at the Mun, but this time we have a negative periapsis, which means that we are going to hit the Mun. Now, whether we hit it hard or whether we hit it soft, that is on the pilot's discretion and the K2D2 system. We should have enough, I hope, fuel to land this. We have 1400 Delta V. Just getting any sites that I can on the way down. All sites collected through the radio side will of course be transmittable if we have a signal. Any samples we get from the surface, however, and observations will have to be returned to Kerbin to count, and that's where the big money in terms of points are. Of course, this is the first body we're visiting. Second will be Minmus, and then from there we will see. I don't know yet. Depends on the actual planet's orientation and where they're at, which one's easiest to get to. You can go to any you wish if you have enough Delta V, but that's not usually the way it works. You go for the ones that have the best transfer window. So let's get this a little bit closer to the ground and see what the touch is like. We're doing a suicide burn now, as you can see. That is what it's called when you're impacting the body, and you're basically landing by using your thrust to slow you down to a point of stop just as you touch down. It's called a suicide burn. And that's what we're doing. It could be safer. There are a lot of other ways to do this. Having a lot more thrust weight ratio is important as well, because if you don't have enough thrust to counteract the movement speed that you're doing, then of course you won't make it. Here we go, we're very close now, and you can see the horizontal velocity is gone. You can tell that by the fact that retrograde is pointing straight up on the nav ball, and the shuttle, the vessel that we're controlling, is facing straight up, perpendicular to the body of the Mun. So coming down nice and slowly now, 4 meters per second, with about 10 to 15% power is enough. it looks as if we're going to have a very crappy place to land. It's not very flat, and of course the landing legs aren't the biggest or best support for the way we actually go in. The most important factor here, however, is the stabilizing system. The gyroscope is keeping us vertical. So we can now do all the science we need to do and see how much we get. Our first accomplishment on the first new body Kerbin has visited in the first ever series on this channel of KSP2. Down on the surface now, we can put our first flag as well, and of course the flag is going to be named, well, the site name is the Mun. I mean, predictable. I will look at giving some proper names when IVA screen has come on. I added the mod to allow it to go in there because the game doesn't give you that option, but it's not much use while we're stuck on the moon. But yeah, now we can do the crew observation, which takes 10 seconds, and the surface survey, so the surface sample, which also takes 10 seconds. And I expect them to be pretty reasonably high science numbers. We've picked a really dodgy slope, and annoyingly as well, there's no scatter there as well, so it just looks a bit boring. Further down the hill, there's loads of stones. It looks a lot more interesting. But never mind. Delta V wise, there's no way I've got enough to get back off the planet. Or off the moon. So we are going to have to send a rescue mission out. That wasn't planned. But I don't have a choice. Because I did try, I think twice, just to see if I could really do something with the amount of Delta V I had left. And unfortunately, the answer is no. You can see there 220 science from the samples alone and 106 from everything else. So 326 science from this expedition so far, which is fantastic. I'll have a bit of a run around like a lunatic. There's not much to see. There is, of course, a relic monolith type thing on the moon. But there's no point finding our way there until we actually get the quest for it, because there is a quest as well. So we might as well kill two birds with one stone as opposed to finding it and then having to find it again. So after realising pretty quickly that I was not able to actually leave them on with the Delta V I had left, I decided to come back and send a rescue mission out. Now, the resources or science that we do have, I managed to learn just a few extra items of the medium level. So you can see the MD there on the parts is for medium sized, which means that we should be able to send a shuttle, a recovery shuttle that's got a lander that has 2 seats, one for the pilot to get out there, and then the pilot that's obviously stranded on the Mun can jump in and they can both fly back to safety. That's the plan anyway. In doing so, it means I'm going to build a much larger asparagus style rocket, and means that I am also able to travel further afield. Though for now, it's the most important thing is rescuing the Kerbal, that is trapped. I think this comes out at about 7,000 or 8,000 Delta V in total, which is a much nicer number than I had before, and it should even work quite well for Mimus 2. Okay, so after, let me guess. Well, I'm not going to guess, actually, I'm going to tell you exactly. It's 6 iterations, I believe it is. So this is the 6th iteration of the rocket, also known as the LSA Medium Lander. LSA, of course, standing for Loki Space Agency, which is the name of my son. Yeah, so this is the 6th iteration that seems to work. The main issue I was having was the thrust to weight ratio. The first sort of stage or stages, the first 2 stages, wasn't quite enough. I could get the rocket to go up there, but once I dropped the first stage, it didn't have enough thrust to continue to make an orbit. I'm hoping I've sorted that now. I think I have. So let's get to a launch after just tweaking it a little bit. So I'll just speed this up through the tweaks. Making sure the fins don't get in the way is the most important thing here. And removing the solid boosters for more liquid. This last part's just nice to have. Things like the lights, making sure they're facing the right way and that they're flashing. Totally irrelevant, but I just like to put flashing lights on my rockets for some reason. Okay, so coming down now to the one, we're close, but not, well, I mean, we're close enough to be able to walk. We only need to get the other Kerbal over to this one, in theory. You can see a double rocket there, is because I detached that one, but it carried on firing, I'm not sure why. But nevertheless, I'm landing on the moon this second time with the grace of a sponge. Simply because it's just proved a bit more difficult than I probably expected it to be honest. And it is the second time doing it, although I needed to adjust some of the thrusters just slightly, so drop them down to I believe it was 80% in order to make the efficiency, the fuel, last long enough to give us enough here. 1600 Delta V, or at least by the time we've landed it will be that anyway. Should be enough to get this ship off once we've got the Kerbal over. It will be a mess. I've got no landing legs, as you can see, and once again I've landed on the dodgiest place on Earth, and we're now going to roll to a stop. Okay, so rolling to a stop gives us the ability to do a bit more science and collect a bit more. And then all we need to do from here is a very long walk or fly with the flight suit from the other shuttle to this one. They both will then fit in, one in the top, one in the bottom, and then we can launch. Although it is a bit on the wonk flat down there, putting full thrust on that and just lifting straight up off the planet will be fine. It shouldn't cause any issues because there is no friction or anything on this, with the gravity being so low. So we can get this Kerbal straight back in, and then jump over to the other pod and walk them over. And here we go for a very long walk for this Kerbal over to the second ship, the rescue vessel, which I'm sure if you're stranded on another body, planet or moon, you won't mind walking, say, 40 kilometers or whatever it is to live, right? So let's get that moved over. It is a bit dark. We are on the dark side, so it's not that interesting, so we'll jump ahead. But yeah, we just need to walk over to the other one, get in the second pod, and then get that launched and back to Kerbin. With that done, we did indeed bring back 200 or so, nearly 300 science. Unfortunately, the first one that landed where we had that 220, we couldn't bring that as well, even though it's a different biome, because the Kerbals can't carry the science. You have to have it in the science bay. So we could go and collect that, but to be honest, it'd be easier just to launch a new rocket. What we're currently doing now is a quest to launch our first satellite. So as you can see, this is a probe by the little square robot character looking thing in the profile picture. Almost looks like a startled creeper from Minecraft. Yes, it does. Anyway, and this then is just going into an orbit set by the quest just to give us a few more points. It'll also give us much better comms network. Now in KSP2 there is no occlusions, which means that the signals from antennas, radios, etc. are blocked by the planet. They go straight through, so you don't really need to set up satellites, but it's fun to do. And then obviously stationary or orbital satellites where they move with the planet are also quite good to get a nice triangle around the planet that you always have communications. With the apogee at 500,000 miles, meters, yes, meters, and the periapsis at 233, I'm going to even that out. So of course you go to the 500,000 apoapsis, and burning prograde will increase your periapsis. This will allow the two to match, and I'll have a nice 500,000 orbit around the planet for this satellite to help, or probe, whichever way you want to call it. But this will then, of course, complete the quest that we had, which we already did, and then stay there now as our satellite. I will set it to be normal, which is facing straight up, retrospective to the planet. It will always be facing away from the planet, with its arse end facing towards the planet. And we are good for that quest too. Next step is Mimus and then beyond, but we are going to end the episode here because we are at time. So thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please click like. Any comments are welcome as always. Subscribe for more. Join us on Discord. Take care. Goodbye.